Zertelo and the Quest for CastleOak by D.S. Arnauld. Read for you by the author. Chapter 6. Radard's Dark Path Begins. Deep in the dark hours of the night, Radard fought to conquer a changeless nightmare. For many hours he dreamed of following an ominous rat through a strange canyon. On either side rose cliffs, steep and tall. Far above them hung a pale red sky. The narrow canyon turned sharply, this way and that, folding into dead ends and many blind passages. Or it split in different directions, and the rat he followed would have to choose the right path. Each time Radard felt the choice was the wrong one. Never once had he seen the face of the leading rat, but the dream always ended in the same horror. At the end of the maze, a giant winged shadow reached its talons into the narrow passage and took the screaming rat away. Each time the dream began again, somehow Radard knew that the rat running before him was doomed. Try as he might, Radard could not make the rat hear his warnings. Radard was aware that he was dreaming, and he was aware that he could not wake up. Radard became convinced it was his father he was following. In the dream, he closed his eyes and concentrated on saving his father this time before he reached the inn. His paw reached out to stop Ratjard as he made the final turn. Suddenly, Radard looked straight up into the hideous grasp of the flying shadow. Radard woke with a start, thinking he heard voices in the main tunnel. The voice of one of his brothers spoke to his mother as though preparing her to see a horror. When Radard entered the main room, he found his mother waiting alone. Then suddenly, 5 of Radard's brothers shuffled in, laboring around a cumbersome burden. As they set it down, Radard could see the crude stretcher bore the mangled body of his father. His mother screamed. "No, mother," said Ratfard in a low, hushed voice. "You'll wake the little ones." Ratjard lay motionless on the burrow floor, bloodied and pierced with deep wounds. The great rat had died on the way. The brothers' effort to bring him home only served to give their mother and Radard witness. "What happened to him? Who did this?" asked Radard. "Father was leading a new battalion of rats through marching drills when he was attacked by a guardian," said Ratfard. Mother squeaked back sobbing cries. Radard thought that someone should go to her to comfort her. No one moved. Then he could hear a pattering of many feet just beyond the entrance. Radard jumped to the ready. "What is that?" His brother put a paw on his shoulder and led him aside. "Spiders are outside the archway," Ratfard said quietly. "They've come for you." "For me?" repeated Radard warily. "The war is escalating." "Spiders outside the burrow?" "Yes, and someone else who wants to talk to you." Ratfard's voice dropped even lower. "It's a bat. And Radard, mind what you say to this one. It's von Nothgrar, second only to Belfar himself." Radard crept out onto the slope of grass. The view of countless spiders milling about his front door gave him pause. In the dark, their black bodies slid from brief outlines of starlight only to merge with the silhouettes of their companions. Later, Radard would become very familiar with this number of spiders, for there were 40, if they had stood still long enough to count, and this was a spider platoon. His brother walked over to a larger shadow and waved for Radard to come forward. "This is the brother I spoke of," said Ratfard, "the one old enough to enlist." Reluctantly, Radard advanced. The bat turned round and faced him. Its nose and mouth were beyond hideous. Its eyes, however, were full of a kindred intelligence, one that Radard felt he understood. "I am sorry for your loss," the bat exhaled in one long breath. They locked eyes. Radard suddenly forgot about the feeling of crushing sadness he had had moments ago. In its place was an incredible anger that he could use to accomplish whatever he willed. "Thank you for your kind concern, my lord." Radard bowed. His eyes never left those of the bat. "Ratjard is a great loss to us as well. He had plans. Oh, yes. Your father could see what Lord Belfar's victory could mean for the rats, for the honor of your family." The bat took a step closer. fluttered its wings, and cocked its head, saying, "Will you join Lord Belfar? Will you lend your strength to the mighty hawk?" Reddard did not answer. He waited as the rest of his brothers emerged from the burrow. He wanted them all to hear what he planned to do. "Serving Belfar would give you satisfaction," promised the bat. "You would have justice." "Or rather, I'd have revenge," said something inside Reddard. At that moment, the bat smiled and knew his ambitions. "I will join." Reddard repeated the words of an oath after the bat. He held his paw over his heart, pledging, but only half listening to what he swore. He might serve Belfar, but he had a personal score to settle. At the end of the ceremony, the bat declared, "I commission you, Sergeant Reddard." "Lieutenant," corrected Reddard. "I have intelligence for Lord Belfar that no one else can provide, and I expect to be rewarded for it." Ratfard cleared his throat in disapproval. The bat smiled. "You must have something precious." Reddard offered his terms. He would provide the name and location of a traitor and lead in his capture, in exchange for the immediate promotion over his brothers. "Who is this traitor?" The longer Reddard looked into its eyes, the more the danger lurking inside its mind showed through. "A threat to Lord Belfar's control. A tiny voice, and yet a dangerous one, because Belfar doesn't know to stop him. There's a muskrat named Degilu." "We already know about that one," said the bat, wagging a clawed finger. "You'll have to do better." "Ah, but do you know who is on his way to help Degilu?" asked Reddard calmly. "I bet you don't know about my friend." Chapter 7. Lessons Without a Teacher. 2 long months passed while Zertelo trained in the ways of a knight. The lizard dreamed of the day Krogrog would pronounce him ready to set out on the next leg of his journey. Zertelo now knew about stars and planets, about right and wrong, and more than he wanted about manners and courtesy. Who knew that part of a knight's duty was to say thank you, please, and you're welcome? Krogrog taught Zertelo the importance of respecting his elders and not making fun of other animals with different customs. The word Krogrog used for a knight's code of conduct was chivalry. As Zertelo grew more confident with his sword skills, his eyes often turned to the bridge above the ravine. Up there awaited Vodbiad's challenge. Only one ready to face the trials of the forest may cross the bridge. Zertelo decided that tomorrow he would tell his teacher that he was setting off no matter what. But when Zertelo woke the next day, Krogrog was gone. The mushroom house no longer glowed with purple twilight, but was just another patch of gray fungi like any other. Why didn't he say goodbye? Wondered Zertelo sadly. Then, with a heavy heart, he took up his sword and began climbing a tangle of vines to the top of the ravine. No sooner had he reached the top than Vodbiad stepped out onto the fallen tree bridge, holding his black fighting staff. Zertelo didn't wait to catch his breath. Immediately he brought his sword up to ready and stepped onto the bridge. "You remember the challenge. To step onto the bridge is to accept a contest of single combat," called out Vodbiad from across the way. "In the name of my quest, I, Zertelo, servant of the light of the forest, accept your challenge. You know that you are not yet a knight?" "I do." "And you know what awaits you in the forest? Darkness, danger, and the unknown. But the time has come for me to face the trials." "Do you have no fear, Zertelo?" "I have both fear and hope. Somehow, I think I'll need them both." "Then let us fight." Vodbiad barked and charged forth with his staff spinning. Zertelo sprinted out onto the fallen tree, his feet gripping the bark and making hundreds of corrections to keep his balance. Zertelo paused. Was he being foolish again? His tail had not grown back to its full length. Was he truly ready? He remembered it was a long fall to the bottom, and Krogrog was not there to help him this time. Aware of his surroundings, Zertelo noticed a blunt end of Vodbiad's staff rushing at his head. Zertelo's sword deflected it with a thwack. So, thought Zertelo, his weapon is strong enough to meet my blade. But as fast as he could get the sword over to block one end of the attacking staff, The other end was already reaching for the other side of his head. Zertelo was slowly being driven backward. He was losing ground. He remembered that he needed to be aware of his surroundings and his opponent's weapon, but also the opponent himself. It was good he remembered, because Vodbiad's thorny tail swished through the air towards Zertelo's shoulder. He spun with the attack, and keeping just close enough to avoid all of Vodbiad's horns, got inside the opponent's fighting range. Now Zertelo had the upper claw. His sword flashed up and down, forcing Vodbiad to go on the defense for the first time in the contest. What else had his teacher told him to see in a fight? Vodbiad was growing desperate to keep up with the quick and agile lizard, and that made the thorny creature vicious. A realization hit Zertelo. He was supposed to see what led to the conflict and the consequences, or in the heat of battle, why was he fighting? To make the bridge keeper yield. Zertelo summoned all of his concentration and lunged forward, slipping his blade through Vodbiad's whirling defense. He stopped the tip just short of the orange skin. Zertelo cried out breathlessly, "Do you yield?" "You could have vanquished me just now," whispered Vodbiad. "You had control of the fight. So why do you ask me to yield?" "I trusted you to do what you said you would." "And how did you fight without your full tail?" "The point isn't what I do with the sword," said Zertelo with a smile. "I have to be able to balance my mind." "Then you have learned the needed lesson, and the forest can trust you with this quest. If you are ready to face the dangers, you may enter the forest." Vodbiad held his staff straight up and down in salute to Zertelo. "How did a great warrior like you come to this awful duty?" Zertelo gestured at the bridge in the ravine. "I lost my honor once. This is my trial to get it back. Would you say I have acted honorably, Zertelo?" "Yes, you kept your word, and you probably saved me from certain death by keeping me out of the forest until I was ready." Vodbiad smiled wickedly. "You may still find certain death, but I yield and let you pass." The horn-covered lizard lowered his head and stepped aside. Zertelo looked down at the mushrooms, where he felt his journey had really begun. He bowed to his opponent, sprung forward across the fallen tree, passed between the two large boulders that flanked the other side of the bridge, and without stopping, crossed the threshold of the forest. Chapter 8. Too Many Spiders, Too Many Rules. Inside the forest, the light was dim. Zertelo made his way over roots and through the undergrowth. A smooth stone ledge, like a natural wall, closed off the woods ahead. Going around would take time, and the lizard decided to climb the enormous gray-green rock to see what was on the other side. He quickly discovered what the green was on the first steep curve. He slipped on the gooey, slick algae, claws wheeling desperately for balance before toppling sideways into a pile of dead leaves. "This is going to be hard without my full tail," thought Zertelo. On the second try, he made it to the top. As he conquered the rock ledge, Zertelo saw that he was entering a world he had never imagined. The evergreen trees had grown so mighty, their tangled branches blocked out the sky. The giant vine-covered towers were shrouded with ghostly tendrils of moss. Zertelo ran forward in the direction of a slash of yellow sunlight. Strange shapes and sounds moved around him. A pair of claws stirred in the vines to his left. A drop of water splashed on a rotten log behind him, and Zertelo had the feeling something was watching his every move. He looked around and saw only more trees and ferns in every direction. Zertelo fought against despair. Krogrog had never spoken of a path. Perhaps there wasn't one. Why had Vodbiad allowed him to pass? The forest was too big for him. Zertelo wondered if he shouldn't go back and ask for directions. No, Zertelo told himself firmly. It was up to him to reach CastleOak. The only choice worse than going the wrong way was not going at all. A noise like tiny feet scuffling in the leaves behind him caused him to turn sharply with his sword ready to fight. But whatever had been following him was gone. Zertelo listened. As he began to walk again, he thought he heard the scuffling feet move above in the trees. Each time he took a step, he heard it coming from the shadows around him. Each time he stopped to listen, the scuttling stopped too. His claw gripped his sword as he walked. Now, passing the last beam of sunlight, he was going as quietly as possible to the darkening shadows beyond, where the mist became a dense haze. His sense of readiness had never been greater. Zertelo found that even though he was frightened, his training told him he could face whatever lay ahead. Still, the dark, unknown fear sent chilling tremors down his tail. An empty stillness lingered here, unnatural, unwanted. What had happened to the sounds of the other animals in the forest, wondered Zertelo. The sudden silence was eerie, for nothing moved, not even the leaves. With every step, he committed deeper to the chosen path. It wasn't too late to go back to the patch of sunlight. An invisible barrier stuck to Zertelo in mid-step. Trying to pull back, he noticed the web stretched like a wall blocking his way to the sunlight. He hacked at the sticky threads and pulled the disgusting stuff from his face. The scuttling sounds came nearer as he untangled the web from his tail. Something monstrously large had made this web, and something with many legs had been hunting him. It was a spider. 6 spiders, counted Zertelo, stealing up from behind and descending on him from the branches above. They were taller than him, all black and hairy, with lots of eyes and hungry, twitching pincers.
"Halt!"
said one.
"You aren't allowed to go into the restricted area.
You aren't allowed to cut down the barricades either.
And you definitely aren't allowed to have one of those,"
whispered the spider dangling above. It reached out with its 8 legs to snatch away the sword. Zertelo beat at the hard shell covering the thing's bulging abdomen. It retreated up its string with a cursing hiss. "Why can't I go in this direction?" demanded Zertelo.
"Belfar's orders. We aren't to let no animals attend the gathering,"
warned a spider who had already lost an eye in a past battle. "That isn't a good enough reason to hinder the creatures from going where they want," stated Zertelo, growing frustrated.
"You shouldn't go where you aren't supposed to. Belfar's punishments for disobedience are harsh."
"I'll judge where I should and shouldn't go for myself," Zertelo said, and lifted his sword. "Why does Belfar not want the animals of the forest to attend the gathering?" The spider stopped advancing. The question had never occurred to them. "Why does Belfar need such stupid, ugly soldiers?" Zertelo continued. The spiders dashed forward, pincers snapping and growing uglier and angrier as Zertelo's words started their thinking. "Unless all you do is bully little creatures and make them afraid to stand up for what they want." The more they were forced to think, the uglier they got. When their faces couldn't get any uglier, they went blank. They had stopped thinking for themselves, and they said together in a droning voice,
"Belfar says no is to attend gathering."
"But why?" "They don't need a reason why," answered a voice behind the advancing spiders. Zertelo thought it familiar, but couldn't quite place it. "They are under my orders." The last creature he would have ever imagined stepped out from a distant tree. "Radard!" cried Zertelo. It became clear all at once. The spider barricade and unprovoked attack was not the random act of hostility Zertelo had assumed. Rather, it was a well-planned trap designed just for him, a web of treachery spun not by brutish soldiers, but by a friend. The lizard tensed as the spiders inched closer. Why did they hesitate? He looked over to Radard, who was staring at the sword.
"Should we pounce, Lieutenant Radard?"
"Lieutenant," said Zertelo. "Is that how the tyrant rewards treachery?"
"It's how he rewards strength,"
Radard answered. The extent of Radard's betrayal became clear to Zertelo. "If only they had to force you or trick you into revealing my mission," he said bitterly. "But that wasn't necessary. You knew it was wrong, and yet you chose to sell me out. Your best friend."
"An enemy,"
Radard remarked coldly. "Why?" Radard's snout curled into a smile.
"That is a question you would ask. Fate has put us on opposite sides."
"No," Zertelo said. "Our choices have."
"I wonder which has chosen the stronger side."
Radard let out a snicker that quickly escalated into a malicious laugh. He gave himself over to it, as if facing a difficult problem and taking the easy answer. The rat raised a claw high in the air and clamped it into a fist. "Take him now!" And the spiders sprung as one, attacking the little lizard. Zertelo was forced to defend himself. Each spider was like fighting 8 sword masters, and there were 6 spiders, all coming at the same time. Zertelo whacked his sword against the hard shells, but couldn't break through. He tripped. A spider crouched over him, opened its pincers, and lowered its foul head. Zertelo tilted his sword tip into the spider's soft underbelly as it lunged to eat him. The spider screamed, then jumped away from its prey and ran into the forest to nurse its wound. Zertelo ran to the next closest spider, slid under it, jabbed his sword into its belly too. When the others saw Zertelo had found their vulnerability, they scuttled away into the shadows. The one above him shot its string up into the branches and ascended to a safe distance. It studied Zertelo in amazement. No one had ever dared to defy them. No one had ever questioned Belfar's authority.
"Who are you?"
asked the dangling spider. "My name is Zertelo. Tell the other spiders what happens when they try to boss around other creatures." He pointed his sword straight at the spider. "Tell them someone's going to stand up for the little ones again. The knights are returning to the forest." With that, the spider slithered away into the branches. Zertelo didn't have time to gloat over his victory. Radard was nearby and had suffered a defeat. His old friend had underestimated the knighthood training. Would failing to capture his victim prevent Radard from attaining the rank he coveted? Zertelo didn't think so, not for a moment. Zertelo began running. He needed to put distance between himself and the spider outpost. With a sudden disappointment, he saw the last patches of sunlight had gone out while he was fighting. He set off in the direction the light had been. He was running to escape the threat of his enemies, racing against the thoughts of anger and sadness surrounding Radard, flying from cruelty and despair. When he stopped to catch his breath, a cold feeling shot through him. "I just fought 6 spiders," thought Zertelo with a shiver, as though the fear had suddenly caught up with him after the long chase. "Why did you do it, Radard?" Zertelo worried aloud. "Why did you tell them my name? Belfar will be looking for me by nightfall." Chapter 9. Help and Hope. He looked around at the growing shadows, but nothing looked familiar, and he didn't recognize any of the trees. He didn't even know from which direction he had come, so he could not retrace his steps. Zertelo turned around frantically, then sank against a stump. He was lost. There was no other word for it. Lost. And soon every foul creature he could imagine would be hunting him. How had this happened? What should he do? Where should he go? Any direction he chose might be the wrong way, and so much depended on him. Old Aladon had given him a job to do. Krog had dedicated his time in teaching him, and Bodbiod had acknowledged his progress, but Zertelo felt he had failed them. He had come so far, and even beaten spiders. Most of all, he thought about his home and wanted to protect it. He wished he could have made it to CastleOak. He wished he could live to see the forest restored. He wished. A dim light spread in a wavy gold mist through the trees in the distance. Zertelo backed into the roots of the tree behind him, tucked in his tail, and peered at the light coming slowly toward him.
"As long as you serve the light of the forest, help will come when you need it most."
Krog's croaking voice reminded him from deep within his memory.
"Usually in ways you least expect."
From the golden light emerged a beautiful dragonfly. Time seemed not to matter as she flew. Her wings flapped far softer and slower than necessary to keep her alight. Zertelo saw she was the purest magic he had ever seen, and he felt the warm peace of perfect sunsets, friends dropping by, and Krog's delicious cricket juice, all in one moment. As long as the golden mist surrounded him, Zertelo felt the joy would last forever. "What do you wish, Zertelo?" asked the dragonfly in a musical voice filled with kindness. "You will truly grant the wish I desire?" Before he had finished asking the question, he knew the answer. The dragonfly hovered in the golden light, waiting for his wish with a patient smile. Zertelo thought about his home at Forgotten Meadow, his log and his sunning stone. He knew if he asked, she would magically transport him back there. Then Zertelo searched his heart for the one true wish among all the ways he saw the world and himself. He wished for what was best for the forest. He wished to see CastleOak. He wished to never be anything but himself. But how could he ask for all this when he was lost and alone and far from where he needed to be? Finally, the dragonfly saw that he was ready and said, "Before you make your choice, Zertelo, know this. Each of us is only granted so many true wishes, for we dragonflies only have so many to give before our magic is spent. You must make the most of your wish, for this is granted to few creatures." "I wish I had help in finding my way. I have a task to fulfill," said Zertelo. "Whatever it is, I'd face it, if I can." "Because you do not ask another to do your task for you, I grant your wish." Zertelo felt like closing his eyes, curling up in the giant tree roots and sleeping a deep, dreamless sleep, knowing he was safe for the time being.